Welcome, teammates. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Dan Cannon, Cobra 07, Senior Cavalry Trainer here at Fort Irwin, California National Training Center. In this episode of TAC Talks, I'd like to talk about transitions, specifically on how commanders identify, set conditions for, plan, and execute them. So let's start with a definition out of FM 396, so we are talking on the same sheet of music. Transitions occur when the commander makes an assessment that the unit must change its focus from one element of decisive action to another. So how are we making that assessment? Well, doctrine gives us 4 conditions that drive transitions: culmination, consolidation of gains, exploitation of the initiative in the form of a sequel or a branch, and change of mission as directed by higher. So given these conditions, let's take a case study pulled from the #1 reason units meet transition criteria here at the National Training Center. And if you haven't already guessed it, it's culmination. And there are a myriad of different reasons why culmination occurs, but it almost always comes down to our understanding of 3 factors: the terrain, the enemy, and friendly forces. So let's talk about them. Let's break them down. Terrain. On average, units develop a good understanding of the terrain and the effect it'll have on both friendly and enemy forces. When it comes to the enemy, most units develop an accurate enemy sit temp, and their collection plan enables them to see the enemy in time and space pretty well. But when it comes to friendly forces, this is where units struggle to see themselves in relation to time, terrain, and the enemy. The reason why takes us back to what triggers our transitions in the first place. And if culmination remains the leading cause, let's consider some anticipated results units should prepare for. So #1, we don't anticipate culmination, so we rarely plan for it. #2, culminations rarely manifest as a result of a commander's decision, and therefore we are reacting to it rather than being proactive. And then finally, most importantly, I would argue, we fail to set conditions necessary for transition in the way of rehearsals, adjacent unit coordination, or sequencing. Bottom line up front, transitions are inevitable. So how are we going to set conditions for them? Here's where the Cav Squadron can help. We are your best tool to enable transition by design. Tasked appropriately, the Cav can place your unit in a position of advantage relative to both the enemy and the terrain. FM 398 states that cavalry squadrons provide BCT commanders with the freedom of movement and action to create advantageous conditions for future operations to seize, retain, and exploit the initiative. The squadron retains experts in identifying when conditions are set for transition, specifically relative to both the enemy and terrain. They have the ability to leverage the push versus pull method through the execution of both reconnaissance and security, but most importantly, they're designed to facilitate the brigade's transition. So how is the Cav Squadron going to execute transition? Inevitably, we are going to insist on a forward or rearward passage of lines. Now I'll pause here and acknowledge that there are many leaders who think that the FPOL, RPOL is an unnecessary tactical task and can be avoided or replaced with another form of movement and or maneuver. So let's discuss the facts and the trends associated with the FPOL. Fact: the FPOL will possibly be the highest risk to force task that we conduct because it places 2 separate maneuver elements in the same battle space. Another fact is that this task presents the highest risk to fratricide, especially if controls are not put into place and units do not rehearse them. Another clear fact is that the passage of lines is one of the most executed tactical tasks we will conduct on the LSCO battlefield. Also a fact: FPOLs enable the maintaining of tempo and sequencing in the offense, and the RPOLs preserve your ground reconnaissance forces in the defense for follow-on missions. So let's talk about the trends. Units who opt to offset their Cav units forward in terrain or direct them to go to ground in an attempt to maintain tempo almost always open up a seam between the maneuver units that are inevitably exploited by the opposing forces. Bottom line, FPOLs and RPOLs are just as inevitable as transitions. But if done well, they'll enable tempo, not disrupt it, but they must be rehearsed and they must be executed just like any other battle drill. If we can execute an FPOL, RPOL at the same level of proficiency as a prescribed battle drill, unplanned culmination that triggers a transition will keep staffs and commanders from becoming reactive, enabling units to transition seamlessly from the offense to the defense, thereby buying time to set conditions to go back on the initiative. I'll leave you with a parting shot. Commanders at all echelons, we highly recommend that you command direct FPOL, RPOL rehearsals, not just between the Cav or of the Cav and the task force scouts with the maneuver battalions, but with the maneuver units involved in the passage of lines. Doing so will inevitably set conditions to maintain tempo, and more importantly, it'll mitigate the overall risk to force. If you're interested in more detailed information on passage of lines, please view our TAC Talks on the subject or just reach out. We on the Cobra team hope this discussion was helpful, and we encourage you to reach out to start a dialogue. You will be hard-pressed to find a more dedicated team of warfighters who are ready for a passionate discussion on reconnaissance and security, answer any of the questions you have, or help your team build much needed readiness. Again, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Dan Cannon. Thank you for watching this episode of TAC Talks. Train the Force.